All right, I believe everybody made their way into the classes. Thank you all for sticking around as we're continuing our study of James. We're going to be in James chapter 4, specifically looking at verses 13 through 17. So the end of the chapter here, James chapter 4, 13 through 17. I hope this study has been beneficial to you. I enjoy the study of James. Always loved reading James. Back when I was, it seemed like it was a very easy book to understand when you would go through it and read it. Very practical book, so I always kind of liked reading it along the way when I would do a study. But again, it's easy to read, harder to put into practice some days like that. So we've started a new section. When you're looking at the book, the way it's outlined and everything, from here till James chapter 5 and verse 12, we're going to be looking at warnings against presumptuous boasting, or kind of that presumptuous kind of going beyond what we can control and do, in that kind of sense. So we're warning against this style of boasting. And specifically this morning, we're going to be talking about how we do not need to boast about tomorrow. So this is a good section. Hopefully it'll be beneficial to you there as we continue on. I'll give you just a moment to get all that stuff down as we begin going through here. Again, kind of slowing down a little bit the sections in what we were trying to go through. You kind of hate to, I talked about it Wednesday night, like we can go real slow, but like the eternal kingdom, I know that was a lengthy study, so we don't want to get it too lengthy to where half a year that's what we're studying, but obviously we could dive down in here a pretty good bit, but we plenty of stuff we want to teach about, so we'll kind of go through this and see kind of how it progresses and goes. But we'll be getting into some smaller sections that we're going to be studying where the verses tend to go together with each other. So James chapter 4, looking there in verse 13, beginning, we're going to see, "Go to now, ye that say, tomorrow or today we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain." So this idea of go to now, if you have an updated English Bible, it'll probably say something like "go to now" or "consider," "come here." That's the phrase we're looking at, right? Something that gets your attention. James is now shifting kind of gears in this, and we've been talking about how we the effects of the tongue, and then how we regard each other, teaching and being in higher places, and then kind of looking at this idea that we do mess up, we do stumble, but we must submit to God in that sense. But now he's kind of changing this scenario, this lesson, and he's saying, "Go to now," or "come here, consider this." Again, the ASV, the New King James, and the ESV have that "come now" or "come here" is the way they're referring to that. So just drawing this attention to this individual. Now, what's interesting and very encouraging to me, when we look at verse 13, the verbs that are used in this verse are future indicative. So I'm not a scholar when it comes to these tenses and everything, but hopefully I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. And when we look at this again, it's the Bible is so rich, and if we'll take the time to really slow down and study some of these things, there's a lot of more material in there than what we may think. Hopefully that is large enough for you to read. But anyway, a future tense. When we talk about a verb having future tense, it says this tense typically expresses an undefined action that will take place sometime in the future. So that kind of makes sense, right? A future tense is this one, at some point in time, this is going to happen, or this is going to happen take place in the future. So again, like we think about a past, a present, a future, so we think, well, that makes sense. Now the indicative, this mood affirms the reality of an action. So when we talk about "I will," it means that sometime in the future, this is going to happen. So the indicative is very important when we look at this, because it affirms the reality of an action. It states that something has happened, that it is happening, or that it will definitely will happen. So you can have past, present, and future indicative. So again, it did happen in the past, it is happening right now, or it will happen in the future. So that's important when we read this passage, because in verse 13, what he is saying is that this is going to happen. So then when you understand that, it really opens this verse up to the presumptionness of what this individual is saying. This is going to happen. So let's notice this. It's kind of like this individual saying, now this is what James is saying, right? He's saying, come you that are saying these things, right? Come here, you Christians who are saying this. You're saying that today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and we will continue there a year and we will buy and sell and we will get gain. So when you look at the tense of those verbs, when you go down through there, that they will continue there a year, they'll buy and sell, and they'll get gain. All of those verbs are in that future indicative tense, which means this person is saying, I'm absolutely going to do this. Now, you see the danger in that, right? Because nobody knows about tomorrow. So the fact that this individual is saying this is what was going to happen. Now when I was reading this, to me, and I may be reading more into this than what it really is, but let's notice this verse here. Let me flip back to it. When he says, go to now, ye that say. All right, so here we go. These people are saying, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city, or such and such. The newer English versions will say such and such a city, and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain. What's interesting to me is that the places where this individual did have control is where he was indecisive. Notice, he says, today or tomorrow. Could he choose which day he went? Absolutely. You could go today or you could go tomorrow. It's up to me. I have that choice. Notice he says, and go to such a city, or again, such and such a city. He doesn't even know which city he's going to go into. Does he have control over that? Absolutely. He can say, today I'm going to go to this city, and in a sense, he can control that by striking out and heading that way. But the things that he had no control over is what he was so sure about. He says, I will go, and I will buy and sell, and I will get gain. So I don't know, I found that intriguing, that this individual, the things that were in God's hands, the things that were in the future that he really had no control over, was what he was so sure about. He says, I'm going to do all this. But we find that the things that he really did have the most control over, he was indecisive about. So I found that intriguing. All right, so it's interesting to know. Let's get back to our notes here. I don't have that. But anyway, if a man thinks that he can provide for all his physical needs, he will see no need for God's help. And I think that's initially what James is trying to get at. That if I'm in such a mind, and we're going to get into this arrogancy, that I can control everything that's going on in my life, I don't need God. And we find that today that many in the Lord's church, unfortunately, feel that way. That's why we have to have lessons like we had earlier. They won't be here. Because why? Why do I need God? Why do I need to go to services? Why do I need to do all of this stuff? Because I'm able to provide everything that I need, right? I'm well off. I've got a good house. I've got a nice vehicle. I've got money in the bank. I've got all these things. I don't need God. I think I've used this example before when we were on a door knocking campaign up in Missouri, that when we got into a kind of a wealthier neighborhood, nobody wanted to talk to us. I mean, nobody really wanted to talk to us anyway, but those people really didn't have anything to do with us. They didn't see any reason why they would need God. Why? I've got everything on my own, right? I've worked hard, and there's nothing wrong with working hard and earning certain things and having a good life here on earth. But when you leave God out of that equation is where you're very dangerous to be in. They simply don't need God. I'll just do it myself, right? I'll just go work extra. I'll go work on Sunday, because if I work on Sunday, I can get that overtime pay, and I can get more things that I need. I don't need God. I thought this was interesting, especially with the community. A farmer can plan for a harvest in the fall, so there's nothing wrong with looking ahead and planning, but he should not be so arrogant as to assume what it will yield. So I thought about these guys that are row cropping and farming around. There's nothing wrong with planning that. I've talked to many of them. Right? They're gearing up. We're about to hit that time of the season, but it's arrogant to essentially go out and get a bunch of loans because you think, I'm going to make such a crop on this, on such a yield on this crop, I'm going to go do all of this stuff. And I know many men would not do that. But that's kind of essentially what we're saying, to assume that I'll have such a yield that I'm going to go ahead and do those things. That's arrogancy. So that's what James is talking about. He's talking about these individuals who are saying, it's going to happen. Well, you don't know. You've left God out of your plans. All right? So look here in verse 14. Whereas ye know that what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. I love how the Bible gets together. I mean, I wasn't even trying to get all this, but we were talking this morning in the worship hour about the fact that eternity is coming swiftly. Every day we're getting closer and closer to eternity. And here we have in James telling us what? Your life is a vapor. It's here for a little while and then vanishes away. I like the ASV version of this better. To me, just me personally, when it says, what is your life? For ye are a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. I guess that's more personal when I think about my life as a whole. But I don't know, to me, it's like you, right? If I were to say you are here for a little while and then you vanish away. I'm here for a little while and then I vanish away. My life. What is your life? Right? It's here for a little while. Now, let's notice this. This idea of appeareth. So it's going to, again, the King James, that's kind of why I'm an advocate for the King James as well. Not only do I think it's a good translation, but the way it writes these words, it's hard for us to read appeareth sometimes, but that ETH, this continual action that's going to be happening here when you read the King James. So this idea of appeareth is, and again, it's a present tense, it's kind of here. It expresses an action that is linear, continuous, or repeated. So this was fascinating to me. My life, it appears, again, you think of linear, a line, it appears for a little time, and then it vanishes away. And the idea that it's this continual, I think about, I know the boys and I, we talk, Carson was saying something about he wanted to kind of work out. He's getting ready for football coming up and wanting to kind of do those things. And he was saying something to me about, I said, well, son, I'm decreasing, right? I've gone past the stage of growing. I'm growing out more than I am up, and I'm decaying, right? My body, it's getting closer. I can tell as I'm getting older that's not the same as when I was his age. So the idea of I'm appearing, there's a little while I'm here, I'm appearing, and again, this little time means a short moment, a short time or just a moment, and then I'm vanishing, I'm continuing. Notice this, same tense, the present tense, the same action as I'm appearing, I'm disappearing, I'm vanishing. I don't know, that kind of makes you kind of reflect on your life a little bit, or to me it does, anyway. So the idea of your life being like a vapor, think of that vapor like some steam. Maybe you're boiling something on a pot and that steam comes up. It's there for a little while, isn't it? Then it goes away. Maybe a puff of smoke in the distance. It's there for a little bit. You look again, it's gone away. I kind of like the idea of thinking of it as morning fog. You wake up in the morning, it's a heavy fog. Next time you walk outside, it's gone. And that's me, right? That's being. I'm here for a little bit, I'm appearing, I'm growing, I'm here for a little bit, and then I'm vanishing away. And then I'll be gone. Now notice that idea of then vanishes, right? I'm appearing just for a short time. And really, in the context of life, not very long. My life, not very long. And then I'm vanishing away. I'm disappearing. Then, the certainty of that. Then I will, right? I'm not gonna appear forever, not immortal. Then I vanish away. So I don't know. It's interesting to me. The even, notice that there in verse 14. It is even. It's disappearing even as it appeared. So I find that kind of interesting too, right? As soon as I'm here, before you know it, I'm out the door. I'm gone. And I guess we look at our life like that. I know back in school they made that comment about the kind of impression you'll make. Stick your finger in a bucket and pull it out. He said that's the kind of impression you'll make. None. He said it's going to stay put. So no arrogance in that. I'm here. I'll come and go. Lord willing. Maybe you'll have a good life to live here and work and service. But ultimately, right? How many men have stood in this pulpit or in the pulpit behind me, or even in the old building and things like that? Right? You're here for a little while. You vanish away. Your life is not very long. All right, let's continue on here. Verse 15. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this and do that. So this idea here, if the Lord will, so that's what we really need to be saying when we talk about those things. When James is writing this again, for that you ought to say, instead you ought to say. That's where the New King James and the ESV, I believe, get it right on that translation. Instead, you should be saying, don't say today and tomorrow I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Instead, I should be saying, if the Lord wills. So that's a good phrase to know, but it's not a magic phrase. So remember this. I can't say, I hope I win the lottery. I'm going to win the lottery if the Lord wills, right? Don't be so callous as to say it's a vain repetition. That's how I kind of worded that. The idea that it's meaningless. It's an empty repetition, and I'm just so accustomed to saying if the Lord wills, and I'm not really meaning it, right? I'm still making my plans. I still got that same attitude. I'm still saying I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Oh, if the Lord wills, and I go on. Well, that's not what we need to do. This is an attitude of the heart, so that's important. I need to keep that in the forefront and say, all right, always, right? I always remember that it's God's in control, and I should say, if the Lord wills, and mean it, right? And have that. There's nothing wrong with making plans, right? There's nothing wrong with Brittany and I planning to retire one day and what we're going to do and make plans to go places. All of us can do that, right? We can set money aside for those things, but to be so arrogant as to leave God out of it, right? That's what we need to make sure we're not doing. And this is what these Christians were doing, and James is addressing here. So an attitude of the heart, if the Lord wills. Now, I think I've got time to go through this. Let's not use this as a crutch. And I was thinking about that this morning. I cannot think of the song. Brother Andrew Conley has a great lesson on, and he brings this out. And it would probably take longer to find his lesson and find out where he was saying this in it. I was trying to bring up my mind. But anyway, there was a song he was talking about when we just talk about, if it is, it is. And he was using this idea. Maybe you have heard someone of a Muslim background kind of making that, if Allah wills, right? They'll say that. It was Allah's will. Be careful with that in the sense that we don't say, because if we use that in the wrong way, we're saying, well, I have no control over it. Right? So it is what it is. We kind of might say that, right? There was a song that Brother Conley was using in that. That's kind of what it's talking about it is what it is. I can't do anything about it. So if we're not careful, we'll say, well, this happened and this happened. Well, Lord's will. Be very careful with that, especially people that lose loved ones or people who are going through difficulties in life. I say, well, Lord's will. Well, just be careful with that, because what we're saying sometimes is then we're leaving ourselves out of the equation, and we're just saying, well, I had no control over it anyway, right? I was trying to do what was right, but it was God's will that this happened. So just be careful with that. What we want to notice is when we say, I can't make a plan without including God. So that's essentially what James is getting at. So don't be so arrogant as to say, well, wrecked my vehicle, I'm doing all that stuff. Well, it's God's will. That's just the way it was. And so just be mindful of that. Be careful with that. Because we're going to look in the next chapter, in James chapter 5, the idea of praying, right? And it's not that God has certain things set in certain order and it's going to happen no matter what. That's not what we're saying. Because we can pray to God, we can petition things to God, and we have free will. We have choices that we can make. Again, I go back to that example, and I wished I had it in front of me, but I was thinking of this morning as we were getting ready. But David asked God if Saul's going to come and destroy him. If he stays in that city, God says he's going to come. If he comes to the city, he's going to destroy you. The people are going to hand you over to him. So David leaves and Saul doesn't go there. So again, God knows, but we still have choice. So just kind of keep that in mind, that I can't just say, well, God, it's God's will. That's the way it is. No control over it. That's not the case. All right. Verse 16. But now ye rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is evil. So this idea of rejoicing, essentially what these individuals were doing was they were taking pride in something. They were glorying. They had pride in themselves about their arrogance. But now ye rejoice in your boastings. You boast in your boastings. What he's trying to get at saying is you're boasting in your arrogance. You're sitting around here saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go here tomorrow and I'm going to buy and sell and make gain. I'm going to be here for a year. You're boasting in your arrogance. You don't understand what you're saying. You've left God out of the equation. This idea, all such rejoicing or all such boasting, if I'm walking around leaving God out of the equation, this is evil. So again, the idea that it's worthless, degenerate, it's socially worthless. That's kind of the idea of what we're saying. It's evil. It's wicked, bad, base, worthless. is what this act is. To ignore God in one's plans implies arrogantly claiming to be in command of the future. So let me read that again. To ignore God in one's plans. So if I'm making these plans, as long as I'm including God, I'm all right. But if I leave Him out, it implies arrogantly claiming to be in control of the future. So if I leave God out, I say what? I can make and break my own fortune. I can do all these things myself. I don't need God. And that kind of rejoicing is evil. We are not to be rejoicing like that. Okay, there we go. I had that up there. So I'll put it up if you're trying to scratch that down. As I was saying it out loud, there's your little, there's the quote there if you want to write that down. So we don't need to be leaving God out of our command or our plans. We just need to say, hey, if the Lord wills, right? Hopefully, like we talked about, hopefully next Sunday, Lord wills, we'll be able to enjoy a meal together with the men and to be able to talk about some things of the future of the church. But we don't know that we're going to have next Sunday to do that. So that's why we say, if the Lord wills, we'll do that. All right, now here, let's spend the rest of, get my eyes checked. The remainder of the time here, we've got about 10 minutes on verse 17. So this is important. Now notice this. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So what do we do as Bible students? When we see the therefore, we go back and see what it's there for. So what James is implying here is that if I am going around and boasting, and I'm talking about making these plans and I'm leaving God out of them, it's evil, it's wicked, and if I do this, I am sinning. Now, I believe, and different men have different opinions on this. You can leave it right in its context, and that's okay. But I think many of the men, I agree with them that it's not limited to just this context of Scripture, not just this text. The idea that if we know what God commands us to do and we're not doing it, it's sin. So we've got to look at this. Let's flip over like I said, we've got about 10 minutes. If you have your Bibles open, let's go to Luke chapter 12. And let's notice here in verses 47 and 48. I've used this verse before, kind of talking about the levels of punishment. Again, the levels of reward in heaven, the degrees of punishment in hell. Many men, I believe Brother Woods uses this verse when he elaborates on this. But Luke chapter 12, 47 and 48, notice what Jesus is saying here. He says, and that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. So the individual that knows what God commands, yet says, I know, again, that's what I was trying to tell y'all this morning when we talk about forsaking the assembling. If I know that that's where I'm supposed to be and I'm openly going against it, Jesus says that individual, he says he's going to be beaten with many stripes. Now notice the contradiction here in verse 48, that he that knew not. So this man that doesn't know and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required, and to whom men have committed much, and him that asks will ask the more. So the idea there that Jesus is speaking about is that if I don't know the Lord's will, I'm not off scot-free. Now notice that. You think, well, that poor family that's out in South America that hasn't heard the gospel, right? Are they going to go to hell? Friends, the gospel is a saving message. Romans chapter 1, verse 16 is the power of God unto salvation. Those individuals, I believe, and I'm not condemning those men. The Bible will, that's in God's hands. That's why we need to go out and do mission work, or not mission work ourselves if we could, but that's why we need to help support mission work, is because these individuals need to hear the gospel. They're lost. Because in verse 48 it says that but he that knew not, but notice, and did commit things worthy of stripes. So this wasn't an innocent person. This individual did stuff that was worthy of stripes, shall be beaten with few stripes. So they're still punished, but they're not as punished as you think about an individual in Crockett County that has the ability to come to services that won't and do those things, right? Versus the man that's over in a tribe in South America where the gospel hasn't been taken. See, where much has been given, much is needed there, right? The idea there, much is required if we've been given much. And friends, we've been given a lot. So Anyway, if you don't agree with me on that, you can talk about that after class. That'll be fine. But I do believe that those who know to do right and don't do it, it's sin to them. And I believe they'll be punished for that. Now, not only that, but here's some other verses in which we can look at. So just to kind of look at these quickly, Ezekiel 3, this is a great text. I like 33 a little better in Ezekiel when it goes through this, but this is kind of the watchman on the wall. Ezekiel 3, when it looks in verses 17 through 19, what he's saying, God speaking to Ezekiel there in Ezekiel 3, Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore, hear the word at my mouth and give them warning from me. So Ezekiel's job was to take what God had commanded and to warn the individuals, right? Just like what we do today as Christians. God doesn't speak to us, but he gives us his Bible. We go out to those individuals. Notice verse 18. When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speaketh to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life. Now notice, I'm not telling you what the Bible says, right? I'm not warning you. The same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. You see the implication as a preacher, as a teacher? We're going to get to that here in just a moment. If I don't tell you what the Bible says, right? If I preach cotton candy sermons, God's love, he loves you, let's just be more loving. If I fail to do my job as a preacher, your blood is on my hand. Now think about that. Now look at verse 19. Yet, if thou warn the wicked, if I'm telling you what the Bible says, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity. He's still going to die, but thou hast delivered thy soul. So as Christians, we have to warn people. That's our job. We have to warn individuals. It's not just the preacher's job. As Christians, we warn individuals because this is going to happen. So more is put on me, right? I know what I need to be doing, but I'm not doing it. So then we get into James chapter 3 and verse 1. What was James talking about then? Let not many be masters, right? Why? Because you're held to a higher standard. Because what you say is going to affect those individuals. See how it's beautiful. When we get into here, James is saying, you have to say what the Bible says. You have to speak the truth, right? We can't stir from these things. We can't turn from this. If you know to do good and you do it not, it's wicked, right? You're sinning. And again, in Romans 14:23, we have where Paul is speaking about those individuals pertaining to eating of meats, that if it causes my brother to fall, that I shouldn't do it because it is sin. Romans chapter 14 and verse 23, he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith. For whatsoever is not of faith is sin. So if this causes you to stumble and I continue to do it, it's wrong, and I should not be doing that. Now, whoops. All right, let's look at this in the last 5 minutes. Let me just kind of read this and get this idea. Brother Bob Whitten, looking at his commentary, made this statement, and I think it's true for today. A common mistake observable in our society with regards to spiritual values is the assumption that individuals are good simply because they do not do evil. Just because a man is not a bank robber does not make him a good father or a faithful Christian. No good father or faithful Christian will rob banks, but there must be positive goodness which results from doing what is good. And I think Brother Bob Whitten hit that nail right on the head. Many times today we look at individuals and say, what? Well, he's not a bad person. She's not a bad lady. But that's not exactly what the definition is. They're not good simply because they're not bad. There must be good works that are going on through this. So what we find is, again, another brother had made the comment, there are many evil things which the one-talent man did not do. And that's important. We'll get into the talents as we get on further into some of our studies. But the one-talent man was a wicked man, but he said he was not a murderer. He did not steal. He was not guilty of taking the Lord's name in vain. But the record does not accuse him of anything. He doesn't accuse him of any of these things, but he is described as a wicked servant. So I kind of use the analogy, right? A rock. I don't steal, I don't lie, I don't commit adultery, I don't do this, I don't do that. Well, neither does a rock. But a rock isn't going to make it to heaven. So we need to be mindful of that. Again, a good parable of that is Matthew 21, verse 19, the parable of the barren fig tree. That's a great parable. It was confusing to me until I took the time to kind of study that. But Jesus curses the fig tree there, Matthew chapter 21. He's going over to the temple. He sees the fig tree and he curses that fig tree. And some individuals are like, well, why would Christ curse a perfectly good fig tree? But what was happening is that there in verse 19, and he saw a fig tree in the way, and he came to it and found nothing thereon but leaves only. So that's important when we think of the history and the culture, everything going on in Palestine. The fig tree, if it had leaves on it, it should have had fruit. So what was it doing? It was a hypocrite. The fig tree was a hypocrite. Outside, it looked like a fig tree that was where it had figs on it. That would be beneficial. But inwardly, when he went to go get the fig, it didn't have a fig on it. So the tree was a hypocrite. So he curses the tree in that. So that's what we find here as well. If we're not doing good, we're presenting ourselves as a Christian, and we're saying, oh, yes, all right, look at me. I'm here when I'm supposed to be and all that stuff, but I'm not really doing anything about that stuff. Again, I'm not committing evil acts, but I'm not really doing anything good either. I'm kind of like the barren fig tree. I'm a hypocrite in that sense. So pretty interesting stuff. All right, so we've got just a minute or two. Any questions or comments about James chapter 4, the latter verses there, 13 through 17? All right. Well, very good. Lord willing, we'll be able to meet here next Sunday. We'll be discussing and getting into James chapter 5. Again, we're kind of getting into some shorter sections as James is closing out his letter. And again, if nobody says anything else, we'll probably go on to the general epistles. We'll be looking at 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, and Jude.